You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I'm your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 183. In this episode of the podcast, we'll be meeting Sara Blaedel, who is a number one Danish bestseller and author of the number one international bestselling series featuring Detective Louis Reck. Her books are published in 38 countries and have sold over 3 million copies in Denmark alone. Her latest novel, A Harmless Lie, will be published on March 22nd. I really had a good time talking with Sara. I really love books set in other countries, police procedural set in other countries, like in Sara's Denmark. Jo Nesbo comes to mind, and there's several others out there that I like. So it's a lot of fun to read those. I read A Harmless Lie and enjoyed it a lot. Highly recommend you go check it out. It's out now. So stay tuned for that interview coming up here in a second. Just a quick reminder, please rate and review this podcast and go check out all my links over at thrillingreads.com/links. I put everything up there, one page, so you can go check it out. I really appreciate your support of this podcast. All right, here is my interview with Sara Blaedel, who is a number one Danish bestseller and author of the number one international bestselling series featuring Detective Louis Reck. Her books are published in 38 countries, and over 3 million copies of Blaedel's books have been sold in Denmark alone. Her latest novel, A Harmless Lie, will be published on March 22nd. Welcome to the podcast, Sara.
Oh, thank you so very much. And thank you for the wonderful introduction.
Oh, you're very welcome. And congrats. So today's your launch day when we're recording this.
Thank you. Yes, today is the big day. I've been so excited about it. Been looking so much forward.
Yeah, and then so you've been publishing, your books have been published in Denmark for many years. Is there a lot of differences between, are you seeing between the U.S. and the Danish markets, or is it all just the same?
I mean, I've actually all of my books are published in the U.S. market as well. But it is so. I mean, it strikes me every time. It's so fascinating that people so far away from Denmark enjoying my books that is set in Denmark, and some of them is set outside Denmark in small towns that you will never know about if it wasn't because of Louis Reck. So it's always very. I'm very flattered that people like to read books, even that it's set in such a small country as Denmark.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of fun. I love reading books set in other countries and kind of reading about, the police procedurals in other countries is so fascinating. And my grandfather, my great grandfather immigrated from that German Denmark area there, the
Yes.
Schleswig area. Yeah. So with my last name, Peterson, they're always like, oh, you must be Danish.
It's very Danish. Yes.
Yeah. So it's kind of funny. So I loved reading your book. It was very interesting and a very, very, very awesome thriller. I highly recommend it to the listeners. But can you tell us about your background before you started writing and publishing these crime fiction novels?
But I've been working as a journalist for many years, but even before that, I'm an educated waiter, so I didn't see myself end up in being a writer or in this business at all. But in the beginning of the 90s, I think it was 93, I founded my own publishing house in Denmark, only publishing crime fiction, but translated crime fiction, American and English, British crime fiction. But the whole idea, I have to say that I'm a huge crime fiction lover. I've been reading crime fiction way back. And before that, I was reading mysteries for children. For example, Enid Blyton, the famous five, or Nancy Drew mysteries. And the whole thing about me and books and crime fiction is connected because I have dyslexia. Not in a very heavy grade, but I have dyslexia, so reading has never been easy for me, and writing was not a favorite thing in school. But being able to read about children in a mystery was probably the smartest thing my mother ever did, because she found out that my mother figured out that if she could get me curious and if she could put me into stories where there was a motor. The plot is a motor, so I couldn't just skip it. I needed to find out what was going on. I need to find out why is the light in the lighthouse that night, what is going on there. So she tricked me a little bit, and I'm very, very grateful for that, because when you're struggling with dyslexia, it's very easy to just skip reading. But of course, when you go into school, then you probably also remember in school when you were pointed out and you were the next to read out loud. I hated it. I mean, it could have killed everything, all the joy of books, and that it could just have put everything down for me. So being able to see myself in these mystery books for children was my way in to start loving reading. But the whole idea of mystery and crime fiction was that someone else was writing it. I didn't plan that until a day where that was the time when I was working as a journalist, and everything was so stressful. We have a production. I was working on a television show. We had a production. Deadline was coming up. People were madly just running around, and I find out my way to deal or to avoid stress was to create a space in my head where I just start telling myself a story. Very simple. I didn't close my eyes so people couldn't see that I wasn't listening to what was going on around me. But telling, when my mother was reading stories for me, I just start telling myself a story. And I think it went on for 3 or 4 months because before I realized that, hey, it's actually a book. You're coming up with a story that has to be put on paper before your head explode. So that was my way into it. I didn't decide to become a writer. It was more like avoiding to get stressed I was curious. I was so curious about the story. So I had to continue.
Was that book published, that first one that you worked on, or yeah?
Yeah, that's actually the first Louise Rick novel.
Oh, wow. Oh.
So, I mean, the story and Louise Rick found me, and I didn't even see it coming until 3 or 4, maybe 5 months into it. And the thing about being having dyslexia, it's not. I mean, it's not like a handicap for me, so I cannot write. I can write, but it's not. I mean, it's not every word that I spell totally correct every time. But it's not like it's not possible for me to write, because it is. I just have to deal with it taking maybe a little more. I need a good editor. Let me just say it like that to deal with.
So now, what do you use to write your books? Is it like, do you use like Word or something else?
I use Word, and it's it could be much more sophisticated or smarter. I could use a writer's program. There is one called Scrivener. I'm just writing my books in words.
Your 10th book in the series. Difference between writing the first one and now writing the 10th one, and how has it been seeing your characters grow over the years? Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
It was interesting because when I was working on my first novel, I did not see it as the first book in a series. I was just happy to see that I could create a story and I could put it on paper and I could go from A to B. I could solve it. I could finish it, and I could have it published. So it was, now so many years later and so many books later, it could be smart or clever to say, oh, I knew from the beginning that this and that would happen to my character. But the truth is that I didn't know that, because I didn't know that I was going to write more about her. So my first book was probably very much just a jump into something I didn't know what was. Now I'm very much more aware that it's important for me to have a background story for all the characters in the book, because it makes it easier to drag in during the story. I mean, if you create something interesting in people's background or give them something interesting that you can lift up and put in the story later, it will help you a lot. I did not know that to begin with. And I've been much more aware that the more specific I am when I created my characters, it's not like I want to put everything, every detail about every character into the book, but for me, it's extremely helpful that I create the character's background for myself before I start writing it. And I give them some skills, or I give them a way to talk, or I give them personality. Because when I put them in the situation and when I start writing, it makes it very easy to see how they will react in specific situations. I did not know that to begin with. So it's really worth for me to spend time building up the characters. And also, I spend a lot of time doing my research. And that is not just like a show-off thing. It's not just to show you and my readers that I'm able to research and I'm good at researching. It's because I want to blur the line between fiction and fact. I want to show my readers that I'm on top of my game when it comes to police work and when it comes to forensic details. And I know what I'm talking about when it comes to all the facts about investigating, because that is my thing. That is what I do. And here it comes. It's very much to cheat my readers, because I want them to forget what is fiction and what is real work. I want them to think, I want them not to think that much about it. I want them to be in a position where they just trust me, where they know that I know what I'm writing about. And probably if this is right, probably the other thing is also right. And it's not right. It's just my imagination and my fantasy. So that is the way I use my research.
I would imagine that your background as a journalist probably helped you with that, because you trained how to interview people and get information from people for you. So that must be very useful for when you're writing your books.
Exactly. And to begin with, and this is the truth. To begin with, that was the only thing I could do. I mean, because I knew how to research. I wasn't afraid of making a phone call and ask people because that was my daily job. So I was very much into, if I can do the research, then I'm good, because then this will work. And the fiction, for the first time, I've never been when I start this, I've never been writing fiction before. I mean, it was so new to me. So I didn't know how to deal with it, because I've been working as a journalist where I try very hard to stick strictly to what people were telling me, not to come up with things. So when I had to teach myself that it should happen in my head and not because people told me, it was very weird, to be totally honest. It was weird, and it took off sometimes. When I started creating Louise Rick, I saw her as, this is a kind of a cliche, but I saw her as a strong female character that knows exactly what you want and everything. She was just super cool, a tough cookie, you could say. But when I start writing on my first Louise Rick novel, I was 2 or 3 pages in the story when she had a nervous breakdown. I did not see that coming. I didn't see it coming because I didn't plan. She was in her kitchen after a whole night being out on the field investigating. A young woman was found murdered, and she'd been out all night, and she was just having a cup of tea in her kitchen the next morning before she was going to briefing at the police station. And in that situation, she had a flashback to the first time she was in the position where she had to go to a young woman and tell her that her boyfriend was killed on the street. And when she stood there in front of this young woman, all the feelings was floating into her. I mean, the situation was so cruel, and she couldn't bear it. And that was all the feelings that I had when I was writing it. I couldn't bear to stand in front of that young woman telling her what had happened. And when I when I was finished writing the scene, and I don't know where it came from, I was just like, oh no, you've just started a novel with a super cool protagonist, and you give her a breakdown on page 3. Bravo, Sara. That was my first meeting with fiction where your head is taking over.
So you must write like what do you call it? Discovery writing. You don't have like a big outline. You kind of just start writing.
I have an outline now, because otherwise it would take me in tons of different directions. But I didn't outline until my book number 7.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I did not, and now I have a very enormously pleasure doing my outlines, because I think it's so fun to create the puzzle. But I was afraid I was afraid to begin with, because when you outline, I mean, then it's very obvious that you know what's going to happen, because you have put it on paper, you have put it on your table, you can look at it all the time, and maybe that could kill some of the creative things that could happen in the story. So I was a little bit afraid of that. It wasn't a good idea. But my experience tells me now that if I do my research and I outline my book, then I have so much more space in my head to be creative, because I know I can go from A to B. I know I can finish it. So it's like it gives me more energy to put on the all the things that just is from my head. It brings it much more to life, I think.
And so, can you tell us a little bit about A Harmless Lie? Like what inspired it? Where you got the idea for it, and what's the story about?
A Harmless Lie is the first time I bring Louise Rick into a story as a private person. It's the first time where she is not working, where she's not in charge of the investigation. And it's also the first time where she has a lot to lose, because she is personally involved. And the idea to the story came because of an earlier book I've been written, as The Stolen Angel. And in that book, there is a character called Mona. And Mona is a very sensitive woman. And I was so curious when I was writing that previous book, because Mona just showed up. I mean, I didn't plan her. I didn't create her. It didn't feel like I created her. And I could feel that the sensitive part of her must be something that have happened earlier in her life, because she reacts very strong when people are disappearing, when when these kind of stories showed up in the news, or she sees it on television, a person went missing, or these kind of things. And then after I finished the book, she's just a very small part of that book, but I couldn't let her go. It does not happen very often that I have to stick with a character, and I knew that it was just for my own sake. It was not because I wanted to tell her story, not at that time, but I contacted a woman who is in charge of a mental hospital here outside Copenhagen, and asked her if early traumas could start up something that will stay for you in the rest of life. And of course, I knew that it can in cruel ways be, of course, ruin people's life. But with Mona, it was different, because she only reacted when people disappeared. And she said, oh yes, if something happened when she was a child or a teenager, then it can stay with her forever. And I asked her if it was common that Mona then could show up at the hospital and say something is very weird and something bad is happening. And then she looked at me again and said, yes, it happens very often. And then sometimes we just sit down and have a cup of tea with them, or a little bite to eat, or sometimes they will stay with us for a while. So I felt that there was a ground under Mona's feet that was very solid. I didn't just create a weird character. Something have happened. And then I dig into what it could be. And in Denmark, it is very common that we went on school trips when we are around 13 with the whole school class, and then we go away for a week. And I wanted that was the story around Mona. She went with her school on a school trip to Bornholm, and one of the girls from the class went missing. She didn't, and they didn't even find the bodies. They didn't know what happened, and that have had a huge impact on Mona's life, and also later on other 4 other girls from the same school class. I wanted that to be a part of the story when I had the idea of A Harmless Lie, because I wanted to know what went on at that time when she disappeared. A Harmless Lie is also a story about Louise's brother Mikkel and her sister-in-law Trine. Trine went to the same school class as Mona back then. She went on the same school trip. And now, so many years later, when they have found Susan's body on Bornholm, Susan was the girl that went missing at that time. These girls from Susan's class went missing one by one. And that could be a very common story for me to write about Louise Rick, but the thing that is not common here is that Louise is not investigating it. She is in the middle of the story as a private person.
Oh, so it's like more of from her childhood, so like more of a like a background, not as an investigator, but as a private person.
Exactly. Yeah, she's involved, and she had to, for other reasons, then she had to find out what happened back then, to now find out why is Trine missing. Trine is her sister-in-law. And I think writing a whole series, now this is book number 10, and for me, it is a new beginning for Louise Rick. I mean, she will be investigating in the books that comes after this one, as she will be back at the police, in the police station. She will be back working again. But for me, it was important also to try. I mean, important for me, maybe not for other, but for me, it was important to see her as also just a human being on the other side of the table, where she was related to the people who were in the case.
Yeah, because I like that in the book, it opens up where she's kind of like taking some personal time. She's like been traveling. She's in Thailand. So yeah, it starts like very different from like when she's actually working as a police officer, as an investigator.
Yeah. And she's not very keen to come home, but something is happening and she has to come.
So I'm kind of curious too now, because on the writing side of it, for listeners who are aspiring writers that are listening to this podcast, I would like to ask these questions. So what's a writing day look like for you? Do you like have set hours? Do you have word count goals?
I wish that I was one of these exotic, flamboyant writers that was sitting in the nighttime with a big hat and a glass of red wine, smoking cigarettes and writing like hell, but I'm not. I'm so boring and traditional. So my day in this writing period will start around, I'm waking up at 7 or 8, and then I go for a long walk, and then I sit down with my computer from 10 a.m. And then I'm not doing anything else. I'm not doing my laundry. I'm not checking the news. I'm trying not to be too much on social media. I'm trying to stick into the bubble. I'm trying to be in my bubble. I'm not succeeding every time, but I'm really trying not to be too distractive about anything else, because the whole thing for me is the writing part is the fun part. And I very often got questions from people who like to become writers or for upcoming writers, say, what is it? How can I make sure that this will be a bestseller? I was like, don't write the book. because you can never be sure. Write the book because you enjoy sitting there with blank paper and all the opportunities to fill it out. And also at the same time, that is the part that I hated most because, oh my gosh, it's a long way when you start up on blank paper, page number 2, and have to write 300 more. So for me, a writing day is to try to make it very comfortable and trying not to be stressed about that I have to write, but I sit there also the days that I'm not very inspired or inspired. Also days where I maybe only write 1 page. I'm just keeping I'm just sitting here. Something will come out of it. Something will happen. At some point, something will happen. And other days, I mean, I've been writing then 10 pages without even knowing it. I'm just so into it and I'm so curious and it takes me and I say, wow, yes. But I mean, I don't mind having these days are very productive and other days that is not productive, because in these days that is not seems to be very productive, then I'm thinking and feeling and remember things and compare things. I mean, I had a situation a couple of days ago. I was sitting and had one of these days where nothing was happening in my head. Nothing. It was just totally switched off. But still something happened because I remember one thing, a situation I remember as a child, and I could put this into the story here and I could use it. And at the end of the day, it makes totally sense. That was exactly the bridge from going from point A to B that I was looking for. But it wouldn't have come to me if I was just rushing on with the story. So it's not bad to have a day where not that looks like not much is happening. Exactly. And also sometimes it's the small things that will be the strongest scenes or chapters going very fast, high speed. You have to, when it's really creepy, you have to spread it out and use a lot of time writing it. But if it's a car hunt, then just get over with it. I mean, it's like also the tempi in the story. Some things just need time.
Yeah, that's good advice because you never know when the breakthrough is going to come. So no need to worry about it, to stress yourself out over it. And what's the crime fiction thriller market in Denmark like? Is it like American authors also popular over there, or is it mostly local writers or European?
Finally, we have a very strong Scandinavian market also. But back in the time, it was American authors and British authors, but still there is a lot of. I mean, Michael Connelly is very popular. Karen Slaughter is extremely popular, and Lee Child. No, there's a bunch of American authors that is very popular here. And they also come visiting us because we have a very strong crime fiction reading community. So we have a lot of great crime fiction readers. They're very passionate about crime fiction here. They like it, so it's extremely popular.
I've been really enjoying those books from that part of the world, and like the TV shows too. They're starting to show Scandinavian crime shows on Netflix. I've been watching a couple of those.
Yeah.
So they're pretty good. So we've been enjoying that.
That's good. That is how we spread the word and grab all readers into us.
Yeah, exactly. Because I watched the show and I'm like, oh, that's really good. And then you find out it was based on a book, and then you're like, oh, okay.
But do you find it annoying that the places and names can seems to be strange?
No, I like it. I actually like that. It's interesting to me. So I enjoy that part. And so it's like traveling. So it's kind of like discovering new things. So yeah, no, I enjoy that part.
That's good, because sometimes you have to think about if it is taking down the speed in the story that foreign readers have to, remember these strange or weird names and places. But at the same time, that is the reason that you have to read, for example, a Danish or a Swedish or a Norwegian crime novel, that it is different.
Mm-hmm.
It is, or the feeling also, I think.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. I think the first big author from over there that I got into was the Joe Nesbo, and then that kind of opened up to others, But yeah, it's kind of interesting. And so, what do you start writing? Like when you finish A Harmless Lie, do you give yourself a break, or do you start right away working on the next on number 11?
But what happened actually was that when I finished A Harmless Lie, I had in my head created the P13, that special task force that Louise Rick should be in charge of. And I was so curious to bring her out with that task force. I was so curious and excited to create a new way for her to be able to investigate all over Denmark. And so the idea for the next story turns up even before I finished A Harmless Lie. And I felt that it was like a totally new energy for me. Because it's from A Harmless Lie, it's kind of a Louise Rick volume 2. I mean, it's a new beginning for her and for me, because I had a break for almost 5 years. I have not spent my time with her. So it was so nice, not just to have her back and me back on the same track, but to have stories that I really want to dig into, stories that I'm curious to tell. That is the energy of a writer, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that you can live through those, through all that. It's like gives you life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So no more stories are coming up.
All right.
With Louise Rick and the P13 task force.
All right, Sarah. Well, Harmless Lie, by the time people are listening to this podcast, it'll be out. So go check it out. It's everywhere, Amazon, everywhere, wherever you buy your books, you'll find it. Where can listeners learn more about you? Like, do you have like a website or social media? Or
I have a website, and they can find me on Instagram and Twitter. I also have a Facebook, but it's mostly in Danish, so probably it will be a little bit boring. But Instagram, find me there, and I will be so happy to answer questions. And I'm very easy to connect with, also on Twitter. And my name is just @Sara Blaedel.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. Really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for listening to Meet the Thriller Author. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with one of your favorite writers of mysteries and thrillers. Or if this episode's guest is new to you, I hope you give their books a chance. Helping listeners discover new authors and books is one of the coolest outcomes of doing this podcast. As always, you can head over to thrillerauthors.com to sign up to my Thrilling Reads email list. That way you won't miss out on any great deals in thriller and mystery books. You can also check out all the links and resources in the show notes for this episode over at thrillerauthors.com. And also please do subscribe to this podcast if you haven't done so already, and leave a rating and review wherever it is that you're listening to this show. If you have done that already, I thank you. I really do appreciate your support. For my other links to my author website, social media haunts, and more, check out thrillingreads.com/links. All my links will be on that page. So that's it for this episode. See you next time, and stay safe out there.